Hi, I'm Tom Kneisner, Technical Training Manager for Dacor. Today we're going to talk about Dacor's built-in column refrigeration installation process. Unfortunately, there isn't enough time in today's presentation to go over all the steps one after the other, step by step through the whole process. So we're going to just touch on the key items that I think most installers struggle with. So hopefully that helps you get over the hump on installations. So first we'll start with the 6P rule. We'll go over tips and best practices, and then we'll talk about resources. So let's get started. The 6P rule, prior planning prevents poor performance. So it's really critical with Dacor built-in refrigeration, especially the columns, that you follow all the steps. Don't take any shortcuts. Don't take anything for granted. The Dacor built-in columns are very unique. Okay, the processes and steps, while they may look the same as some other manufacturers, in fact, there are a lot of aspects that are completely new and different. Okay, refer to the installation manual for all the steps. Don't skip anything. Don't make any assumptions based on what you've done in the past with other product. Go prepared. Make sure you have all the tools you need. Make sure you've got all the moving equipment and floor protection and blankets, all those kinds of items. Make sure you've got it all before you go out there. And then lastly, site inspection. Make sure you don't start an install until somebody's inspected the site to make sure that not only the path to the product navigating through the home is all good, but also the enclosure is the right size and is correct. Okay, I'd like to provide you with some tool and equipment options that you may not have considered. These are ones that I recommend on a regular basis, make your life a lot easier. First is an appliance dolly. I'm sure you guys have all got one, but this is the one that I've used and I prefer and I recommend. It's from the company called Yeats. It's their number 9 model. It's 71 inches high. Our columns are 83 and 3/4 inches high, and so it's almost exactly the same height as the column. It makes it a lot easier to move the unit around. Another item that goes along with that are these larger wheels. When they're attached to the dolly, it makes it a lot easier to navigate around. So if you attach a set of these large wheels and onto the dolly in this configuration, it makes it a lot easier for you to wheel this unit around. You're not supporting the weight of the product on your shoulder. You don't have to worry about trying to look around. In this configuration, the unit will stand upright in this position on its own. Now you can wheel the dolly around and maneuver it very easily, and it's a lot safer. Now, if you add a second set of large wheels, you can wheel the columns around in this configuration, kind of like a gurney. This is great, especially outside when you're going over different rough surfaces. For instance, you don't have always a driveway to wheel it up to the front door on. You've got to go across lawn or gravel or pavers or some uneven surfaces. This makes it a lot easier and safer to navigate. Another thing I like to recommend is a 90-degree right angle drill attachment. This will come in handy on the hinged side of the column and built-in refrigeration. There's several screws that you have to loosen and retighten or fasten in the space between the hinge and the column and the cabinetry, and this will help you prevent uh, damage, and it gives you easier access to getting those screws in and out. A 6-inch number 2 Phillips bit, preferably magnetized. This will come in handy in a bit, and it'll become evident why. Okay, so it allows easy addition of screws. And then lastly is a woodworking clamp. So there are some occasions where it will aid in compressing the units together when you're pairing them together. Okay, so before we get started going with the tips and best practices, let's talk about some of the different models and the configurations that they can be installed in, okay? So first we have a standalone operation. That's a single unit by itself. We can pair two columns together. We can also pair three columns together. So let's start off with learning about the standalone units. We have 36-inch built-in French door refrigeration, the DRF 36 5300 and the 36 7500. The only difference with them is some of the feature set. They're physically exactly the same size. Customers can purchase these. All the units that we're going to talk about here, with one exception, they all come with no panel attached. So they have an unfinished front. Customer needs to buy an additional door panel kit. It would be either in stainless or graphite finish. And they can also opt to go with a custom door panel that their cabinet guy would manufacture for them. Also, that can be standalone is our 42-inch built-in four-door refrigerators. There's two identical models similar to the 36, a 5300 and a 7500. Once again, those come with an unfinished front, and the customer would buy an additional graphite or stainless panel kit, or they can do custom. Now, this is the one that's completely different. The 42-inch side-by-side. This comes with finished panels on it. It installs a little bit differently, but this is meant to go standalone. Now we'll talk about two columns paired together. We have on the column side, we have refrigerators and freezer columns. The refrigerators are available in three different sizes: 24, 30, and 36. And in the picture here to the right side, you see the refrigerator columns on the right, freezer on the left. Freezers are available in four sizes: 18, 24, 30, and 36. Now, one thing that is common with the column units are the last three digits of the model number. So you see RAP or LAP. The R and the L stand for the hinge swing. So these units are hinge specific. The hinges cannot be reversed in the field. So make sure that when you're going out in the field to install a set of paired columns, or even a single column for that matter, that the swing of the hinge matches the environment of the enclosure. Okay, and that if you're doing a pair, that you've got a left and a right hinge swing, so that way you can mate them together properly. We also have 24-inch wine columns that are available with either a left or a right hand hinge swing. And once again, unfinished front, and the customer would buy their graphite or stainless panels to be attached to them. So when we pair two columns together, we also need the additional pairing kit so that we can bracket the units together and use a piece of finish trim to cover the union between the two. And they can only be joined at the non-hinged side. A three-column pair, there's two different ways to do this. First is the way with a partition. Okay, so typically we would mate our third unit to the left or right side to one of the hinged sides of the unit. The hinge partition needs to be 1 9/16 inches thick minimum, could be wider. Okay, and we can do this on the left or right hand side. We will still need that standard pairing kit for the regular pair of units. Now, there's a non-standard way of doing this as well, where if you customer needed these units mated together, the third unit on the hinged side, then the partition would need to be much wider, 7 7/8 inches at the least, at the minimum. So we have clearance, so when the doors are, both of the adjoining units are open, the doors and the handles do not interfere with one another. And then we have the new way of doing this with a trio panel pairing kit. Okay, so when the wine columns came out, there was interest in being able to mate the third unit physically to the other pair. So in order to be able to do this, we developed an additional kit kind of after the fact. This allowed us to add that third unit to the hinged side of the left or right pair, like you see in the illustration above. So in order to do this, besides having the three columns, you're going to need 2 standard pairing kits, as well as the trio column pairing kit. The installation manual will have the instructions for how to do the trio column pairing, as well as the instructions that come included with the trio column pairing kit will show you how to do that install. Now, we're going to go over those main points that I feel are important for you to remember and concentrate on. The rest of the install is going to be in the installation manual. Okay, things to remember, irregardless of the width of these columns, they all have the same height, physical height, and they all physically have the same depth. Now, this depth here of 25 inches is with the panel attached. Okay, the unit without a panel is going to be 24 and a quarter inch deep. The column panels come standard at 3/4 inches deep or thick. So when we add the two together, we've got a 25-inch depth of the whole unit. These columns are extremely heavy. See the 36-inch columns are over 600 pounds. So you're going to need 2 people when you do these deliveries and installs, so that way you can manage the weight of the units. And in some cases, depending upon the installation, a 3rd guy might not be a bad idea, at least till you get the unit into the home, and then 2 guys will be required at that point. So it's important to inspect the location before you actually go and do the install. Okay. Are there any challenges that you're going to face from the truck to the home, and then from the front entrance all the way to the kitchen, wherever the columns are going to reside? Are stairs involved? Are there any tight corners that you're going to have to navigate? Are there any narrow openings that you're going to have to get through? All these things need to be considered beforehand. Okay, somebody needs to inspect the enclosure of the cabinetry where these columns are going to go. Is it the right size? Is it square? If it isn't square, we're going to have trouble aligning our door panels so we get an even gap all the way around, left and right, top to bottom. So make sure that that opening is square before you go to do the install. If it isn't, you need to have a conversation with either the builder, the site manager, the customer, and explain what you're up against. Maybe it can be corrected if it's early enough within the point of construction. If it's too late, then you're going to have to explain that you're going to have compromise on how those door panels are aligned because the opening isn't square. We need to make sure that the floor is level. Okay, we have, if the floor is out of level, front to back or side to side, it's going to pose some challenges to the install. So if we can do things to make the floor level before we try to install the refrigerator, it's going to be much easier. These units all need to be raised up as part of the installation in the enclosure. The leveling legs, or the lifting legs that are on the unit, allow you to lift the unit a maximum of 1 inch. So if we have a floor discrepancy front to back or from one side to the other of more than 1/4 inch, then something needs to be corrected before we install those refrigerators. If we don't make any correction at that point, we're not going to be able to raise the unit and level it properly. And then lastly, we need to make sure that enclosure is plumb. By that, I mean the enclosure is perfectly perpendicular. So the unit has to be level in that enclosure. The opening has to be square, and then the floor has to be level. Also, we have to make sure that the enclosure is the right dimensions. Okay, not only left to right and up to down, but depth wise. Remember, these units are 25 inches deep, or the enclosure must match that. It needs to be at least 25 inches deep. We can install these units flush or proud. If we want to achieve a proud install, we can do that with an enclosure that's a little bit less than 25 inches deep. But if we want a flush install, which is the most common, the minimum depth of the enclosure has to be 25 inches. That includes baseboard trims, electrical outlet at the top of the enclosure, any electrical cabling or wiring or electrical boxes that might be against that back wall in the enclosure. Nothing can protrude inward into the opening that would minimize the depth of the opening, because then we won't be able to get a flush installation. Now, cabinet opening height, the standard opening height is 84 inches. We can do 84 and a quarter. We can do less than 84. All those different dimensions that you can do from minimum to maximum cabinetry opening height are in the installation manual, and hopefully the builder, the designer have all taken that into consideration before the construction of the opening. Last, the water supply lines. We want to make sure that wherever they're coming from, either from the back wall of the enclosure or side cabinetry, that the water lines are routed in such a way that they won't be in the way as we slide the refrigerators in or out of the opening. Okay, prepping the work site. Uh, Before we put any units into the enclosure, we want to make sure that not only was it square, level, and plumb, but we want to clean it up. No debris in there, no sawdust, no plaster dust, no bits and scraps of wood or nuts or screws or nails. I want all of that out of there. A lot of times, an installation might be taking place during the course of construction, and that stuff hasn't been cleaned out of the opening. Make sure that you do clean it out of there. We don't want any of that loose sawdust or plaster dust to be sucked up into the condenser after the fact and causing a cooling issue. So please take the time to sweep that area out and get anything that's in there out of there. Make sure you use floor protection as you're wheeling the unit through the home uh, and into the enclosure, so we protect the floor. Make sure you got plenty of blankets for your tools to be set on and for any of the um, accessories to be set on, and as well as the door panel when you're attaching door handles on it. And we're going to talk a bit about the water line shutoff. Where is it located? Typically, we're going to find it in the back of the enclosure, which creates a problem potentially in the future if there's a water leak or the unit has to be serviced and water has to be shut off. We can't get at it without pulling the unit out, which is problematic. So maybe an inline water shutoff would need to be added. So that's something to consider. Okay, so when we unbox the unit at the job site, we're going to inspect the carton. Is there any damage to it? All right, so then when we get the carton off, want to re-inspect that unit and see if there's any physical damage. We don't want anything to be wrong with the unit physically. The fact that these things are built in, some minor cabinet damage to the sides or the back is probably okay as long as it's only a little dent or a ding. Anything more severe than that, and then we got to suspect that possibly it transferred some damage to the interior. So at that point, we need to make a judgment call whether or not that unit should be swapped out or we can install it. With all the packing off the unit, we're going to see attached to the front of the unit an installation kit and door and cabinet side trims. So we need to make sure that is there. Take it off the front of the unit and get it inside the home. Okay, and then we're going to need to inspect those kits to make sure that they've got everything that we need to complete the installation, as well as the parts for a pairing kit if we're doing a side-by-side install, or the trio pairing kit parts. So the installation kit that comes with the columns is labeled based on the size of the column. So there's a different sized kit for each size width unit. So we need to make sure that the kit that we've got supplied with our column matches the width of the column. So in the example here, we've got a 24-inch column installation kit. It also lets us know whether this kit is for a right-hand hinge or a left-hand hinged unit. So we also need to make sure that the kit that we're getting not only is the right width for the unit, but also the right hinge swing. So if we open up the kit, we're going to see that we got a multitude of parts in there. Uh, there's an installation guide, as you see in there, a big check sheet. It has some steps of the install process on there, but there's also a checklist on there so you can check off and make sure you've got all the components from the kit there before you get started. So please check, because on occasion something is missing. 99% of the time everything is there, but once in a while something gets overlooked. So you want to make sure everything is there. Also, it gives you a chance to inspect the parts and make sure nothing is damaged or scratched that you would have to reorder. Pairing kit. Okay, this is necessary when you're going to do a side-by-side install. So the components that make up the pairing kit, you're going to get 2 locking brackets. There's also going to be a lower and an upper plate. There's going to be 2 sheets of insulation and metal center trim that's going to cover the union when you join 2 units together. The trio column pairing kit is going to come not only with a set of instructions, but it's going to come with upper joining bracket, a right and a left adjustable bracket, and a front joining bracket. You're also going to need an additional standard pairing kit in order to complete the installation. So let's cover the high points of the installation. Okay, we're going to start with getting the unit into the home. Okay, the unit comes bracketed to a shipping pallet. So while it's on that pallet and fastened to it, the unit is stable. It's not going to tip over. So once you've got it unbracketed, you're always going to have to monitor this to make sure the unit doesn't tip over. So on each side of the bracket, you're going to have 5 bolts that have to be taken out. Then you can lower the unit onto a dolly and take it off of the pallet. You can transport this thing either from the back of the unit or from either side, but avoid anything attached to the front of the unit. The units are, once they're off the pallet, they are tip hazards, especially when you open the door. So you're going to make sure that while you're going through the install process that you've got at least 2 people. One guy working on the unit with the door open and the other guy acting as a spotter, making sure that the unit doesn't tip forward. The point I want to make here is the orientation of the actual electrical outlet. Okay, you see the picture on the top there, the cord, once it's plugged in, runs downward, which could be problematic, especially on a narrow depth enclosure. Okay, as we slide the unit in, if it's a real tight enclosure, we run the risk of, as the back of the unit goes all the way in, it could push against the bottom of that electrical cord and pull it out of the socket. So we can see in that picture the ground lug for the 3-prong of the outlet is on the left-hand side. That's the wrong orientation. It should be orientated like you see in the lower picture with the ground lug on the right. So when you plug the unit in, the cord is going to go upward. So that way there will be no interference as we slide the unit into the enclosure. Let's talk about water lines and the water shutoff where it's located. The install manual is going to say that these 3 locations, the left side, right side, or behind the unit, are ideal. Well, actually, behind the unit isn't really ideal because if you have to get to the shutoff after the install because you've got a water leak or somebody needs to service the unit, they can't actually get at it without pulling the unit out. So to shut the water off in the case of an emergency, the customer would have to run outside or find wherever the main shutoff to the home is located. That may be a big problem if this is a condo or a townhome or an apartment, because access to that might be somewhere that's not readily available. So we want to make sure that we've got some type of a shutoff that's made available to the customer, and we'll talk about that here in a sec. The other step is the water line. We need to dress it in a place on the floor where it's not going to be rolled over by the unit as we slide units in and out, and that we have enough slack so if the unit does have to be pulled out for service, that we don't have to disconnect the water line. So Water line isn't supplied with the unit. That should be there already. If additional water line is needed, that's something that you would have to supply. And you can utilize flexible PEX type that's 1/4 inch in diameter, copper that's 1/4 inch diameter, or you can use what seems to be the more preferred method these days is the braided stainless steel. All of these methods can be utilized by running it underneath the unit. If that water shutoff is behind the unit, maybe it is a good idea to add an additional shutoff. So depending upon what kind of water line you're running, you can use one of these, a John Guest style, a compression, or the screw-on for the braided type of cabling. And these all should be able to slide underneath the unit with the rest of the slack after you've got everything connected. So the water line connection takes place at the front of the unit in the left-hand side. The water line is attached to the water filter assembly. And as you see in this new picture here, the blue line running to the water filter assembly is our water inlet. So we would make our connection there to a compression fitting. Now, there's also another way you can run water lines to the unit, and that's through this opening in the back of the unit. This is not the preferred method, but this is something that people seem to want to use. I'm going to ask you to refrain from it, but if you want to, it's okay as long as you take some necessary precautions. The first is make sure you have adequate slack so you can pull the unit out while it's still connected, but not this kind of slack. This is way too much. Okay, so you've got to have enough so you can pull the unit out safely and leave it connected, but not so much that we have this. Let's instead run underneath the unit. We can run braided flexible tubing under there without a problem and connect through the front. We should not be running slack and leaving our slack inside the unit because if we do, we run the risk of it interfering with the condenser fan blade. If we run the water lines through the inside of the unit, the only place that we can put our slack is here at inside the unit. So put it in this area here and try to secure it as best as possible with some zip ties to the tubing so that way it doesn't interfere with our condenser fan. One of the things that you'll have to do before you can hang door panels on the door after you've got the columns securely fastened inside the unit is we need to remove this top cap off of the door because we're not going to be able to hang the door panels and align them with the top cap on there. In this illustration, we see two T-shaped metal brackets that hold this top cap onto the door. The 30 and the 36-inch wide units have these two T brackets. An 18 and a 24 will only have the one that you see here that I'm circling. So depending upon which style you have, you're either going to have 4 or 2 Phillips screws that you have to remove. This is where our 6-inch magnetized bit comes in handy. So before you take these screws out, we're going to pop this cover off this little gray box here, and we're going to remove a connector. Once that connector is removed, then we can take off our top cap. So there we see the connector. Another tidbit I can tell you is there's a piece of cellophane that's attached to the front of this top cap. Leave it on there during the install process because as you're disconnecting this top cap and then reconnecting it, there's times when that front face of that cover is going to be resting on a door bin or rubbing up against something, so that plastic is going to protect the front from getting scratched. Once you've got everything reinstalled and reattached, then you can remove that cellophane. In the installation kit, we have foam insulation we're going to have to attach to the sides of the refrigerator. So on a single column install, the 4 pieces of narrow strips of foam we're going to have to attach 2 to each side of a single column install. That foam will cover the heads of screws that fasten this bracket to the sides of the refrigerator. So one strip of foam will cover 3 screws, and the other strip of foam will cover the other 3 screws. So we don't want this foam to cover the whole bracket. We just want to cover enough of the bracket that we're fully covering the heads of the screws. And the reason that we want to do that is that foam not only will insulate, but it also helps to prevent this type of scratching or gouging that might take place when we slide the unit into a tight enclosure. Now, if we're doing a pair installation, we have to do some more prep before we can slide the units into the cabinetry. On the side of the units where we're mating it together, we have to take that side bracket and we have to remove it and reinstall it. So we see in this picture here, behind the bracket, we have an extra set of holes. So we're going to remove the bracket, take those 6 screws out, reset our bracket and align it with these additional holes, and then reattach the bracket like you see here. Okay, so when we do that, our pairing trim will cover the union correctly. If we take those brackets, we set them back and put the trim on, that trim is going to rest against the front face of the cabinet. If we forget to set that trim back and we attach that center trim, it's going to virtually float. It's going to be loose, it's going to wobble, it might not want to stay on. Also, you're going to find that the doors won't close. This is a problem. If you forget to do this, then you're going to have to pull a unit back out so you can reset those brackets back. So make sure you do that first. Now, if we're going to install a set of columns together in a paired configuration, we have an additional set of foam that comes in the pairing kit. It's these 2 larger pieces of foam. And we're going to attach them to the side of the freezer that's going to join to the refrigerator. And we're going to cover the heads of the screws just like we did with the narrow trim. So we'll attach foam to both sides of each fridge like you see it in this picture. Now it's possible that you can put these in different kind of configurations, right? They can be mated together into different size configurations. The fridge can be on the left, the fridge can be on the right. Irregardless of how we're doing it, that thick piece of foam is always going to be on the union side of the freezer column. And once again, make sure all our foam is covering the heads of the screws. The installation kit comes with a white plastic jig or a positioning aid. So we're going to use this for multiple things. What we're going to talk about here is scoring a line on the inside of the cabinetry opening so we can set the unit back at the proper depth. So we have 2 holes here, one marked frameless, one marked overlay. If we use this hole for the frameless part on the jig, we're going to mark our depth for a flush installation. If we use this hole here for marked overlay, we're going to use that to mark our line for depth for a proud or standard install. So using a pen or a pencil or a marker, we're going to draw a line using our jig along the front edge opening on the left and right hand sides. We can start all the way at the top and bring our line down, and we'll stop about 12 inches before we hit to the floor. And the reason for that is we know that the toe kick area of the refrigerator is back set, and if we draw a line all the way down to the floor, it could be visible and be unsightly, so we don't want to do that. Now, a tip here is, depending upon the finish of the cabinetry, a pen or a marker might be difficult to use or see. So I like to use a scribe and scratch a line instead of using a pen or a pencil. That way something's more highly visible. So in this picture here, I'm showing how far the unit has to be set back. So this is the line we would have used to mark with our jig for our depth. And in this case, it was for a flush installation. So we want to slide our unit into the enclosure, and after we raise it up to the proper height and get it level, we want to make sure that the side brackets are up right against the back side of our line that we drew, or the line we scored in there. We don't want it to overlap the line. We don't want a gap behind the line. We want it to be right up against that line. And if we achieve that after we've got our unit raised and leveled, then when it comes time to do our door panel alignments, we've saved ourselves a lot of hassle, because when we get it in this arrangement here, um, the amount of adjustment we have to do to draw the door in or back out is going to be very minimal, or maybe in some cases even not necessary. So we can save ourselves some time if we get this step correct. Okay, let's talk about raising the unit. There are 4 leveling legs on each unit, one in the front on each side and one in the rear on each side. And in this illustration on the right-hand side, we can see that the outermost leg is for the front and the inner one is for the rear. Like I mentioned before, these have a limit of raising of 1 inch. If we're doing an 84-inch enclosure, we really only need to go up 3/4 of an inch. But for an 84 1/4, we'll use that full inch of rise. It's important that when we go to raise these units up with a impact driver or a regular drill, that we do in short bursts. We're going to use a 10 mm socket. We're going to start with our front leveling legs, and we're going to do the front left and right in short little bursts a little bit. And then we'll do that to the rears, left and right, to match what we did with the front. And we'll continue this process with each unit until we get the unit lifted up to the proper height in the enclosure. The important thing to remember is never to go maximum torque, and to never go try to raise either of the front leveling or rear leveling legs the full limit in one shot. We want to do it in those little bursts to help prevent damaging those leveling legs, because if one is to get stripped or the shaft on one of those legs gets damaged, and the leveling leg can't work, the installation can't proceed. We have to take the unit out of the enclosure and replace the legs. So that means now we're going to have to get a service call on the unit. There's going to be delays, and depending upon the situation, that's going to be very problematic for the customer. Okay, door panels. So customer has the option of purchasing a stainless or a graphite panel kit to attach to the front of the unit. They also have the option to do a custom panel. Now, in the install kit, you're going to have all the brackets that you need to hang and attach the door panel to the unit. But the door panel kit is going to come not only with the door panel, but a matching colored handle and finished toe kick. Now, if that customer decides to go with a custom panel, that would be something that the cabinet guy is going to fabricate, and they can do some pretty wild things like you see here in this picture. So they can make a custom panel out of wood, they can make it out of metal. Custom panel, depending upon the width of the unit, cannot weigh more than a certain amount. All that information is in the installation manual, and it needs to be adhered to. The custom panels cannot be more than 3/4 of an inch thick in order to achieve a flush installation. So here we see custom panels for a side-by-side install. Here we see it on a 4-door 42-inch unit. So there's all kinds of things that can be done for customization. And here's a French door 36. And one of the things that I see is becoming more common is designers will have cabinetry configurations so that the door panel will extend a great deal higher than the actual unit itself. This is fine as long as the weight of the panel and the thickness of the panel don't exceed what the limits are in the installation manual. The install kit comes with the panel brackets that you will use to attach to the back of the custom panels, or the graphite or stainless panels. On the graphite or stainless steel panels, there's going to be pre-drilled holes on the back of the panel. You'll line up the brackets with those pre-drilled holes. Use the screws that are in the kit, the flat-headed screws, as you see here, and you can drive those in 10 per bracket. There's extra screws, so if one gets stripped as you're trying to attach them, you have extra. These panels, The screw holes in the panels are not pre-drilled. I'm saying they're pre-drilled, but they're not threaded. So as you're driving your screws in, you're going to have a lot of resistance. It's going to be tough to power those screws in. The screws themselves are a softer metal than the actual panels on the door itself. So you need to take extra precaution as you're driving them and make sure you're going in perpendicular, not at an angle. Back up the torque on the driver a little bit and put some pressure behind it as you drive it in. And as long as you're going straight in and you've got that back pressure behind it, they should drive in relatively easily. If you're tasked with attaching a custom panel, the install kit comes with a template, and there are instructions on the template for how to align it with the door panel, so that way you can mark your screw holes that you're going to have to pre-drill so you can attach your panel bracket. One precaution is make sure that if there's a narrow thickness to your door panel, especially in the centers, and it's narrower than 3/4 of an inch, don't drive screws into that section of the door panel. Load them up on the exterior brackets, and as long as you've got 8 to 10 screws in there, that should be enough to support the weight. Attaching the door handles. If you're using the graphite or the stainless panel, you've got pre-drilled holes in the door panel that you can align the door handle to attach. There's also these stiffener or reinforcement plates that come with the kit. They go on the back side of the door panel, and you can line up the holes in these reinforcement plates with the pre-drilled holes in the panel, and then put your screws through the reinforcements through the door panel and then sink them into the door handle. Another caveat, the door handles themselves, the holes in them for the screws are not pre-drilled. So as you thread the screws in there, you're going to have a lot of resistance because they're not pre-threaded. So make sure that you've got your screws going in nice and true. The screws are softer metal than the handle. So as you start to gain resistance, if you've got your drill at a high torque setting, you run the risk of snapping the heads off the screws. So be careful, back the torque off, drive them straight through, you should be fine. As long as you know that you run the risk beforehand, you can avoid that from happening. Okay, if you're putting handles on a custom door panel, there are no templates for proper height or positioning. That's all to taste based on what the designer or the carpentry person, a cabinet guy, or the customer has put in place. The big thing to remember is the screws that fasten the handle to the door panel have to be countersunk, so that way the panel can go flush against the front face of the door. Then after you've done all your alignments with the door panels and you've got them positioned right, everything is aligned side to side, and at the top, we can put our top cap back on. Okay, we're going to reattach our cable. We're going to put our cover over that little box. We're going to position the T-brackets in place, and then using our screwdriver with the magnetic bit, we're going to drive our screws back in through the top of the door. I'll talk about the water line. Attaching that water line to the fitting that's on the unit, make sure you check this. Okay, so on the side of the water line that's running to the water filter assembly, that's that blue tubing, unscrew the compression fitting and make sure that that tubing is fully seated on the fitting, and then reattach your compression fitting or nut. If you have a gap and you don't check it and you were to leave it go, you run the risk of the water pressure popping that tubing off of the fitting, and you're going to have water all over the place. So do everybody a favor, including yourself. Take that compression nut off, slide it back, make sure that that tubing is fully seated. Then you can attach your water line, open up the valve, and check for leaks. Make sure everything is nice and tight and there's no leakage. Okay, the last step of the install that I want to talk about here is when you're attaching the cabinet side trims, or you're putting on the center trim from the pairing kit. Make sure you don't pry against the front face of the cabinet. It's not metal, even though it looks metallic. It's a soft plastic and it's very easy to dent. It's very easy to scratch. Okay, if you scratch it, you're going to see white underneath it because it's a painted on finish. And if you dent it, it's going to stay dented. There's no cosmetic kit. There's no replacement pieces that you can use. If you do this type of damage, it's unrepairable and the customer isn't going to be happy, right? They're going to want somebody to replace the unit. So it's kind of a you break it, you bought it kind of a thing. So knowing in advance that this can happen, you're going to be extra cautious. Never pry against that front face, okay? If you're using a drill anywhere near this, especially when on the hinge side of the unit, that's where I want you to use that angled driver. You're going to avoid scratches or nicks to that front face of the refrigerator. All right, because if you cause that damage, you bought it and you don't want to go there. Resources. The first resource I want to talk about is on YouTube. There is a half-hour long video that you can look at. If you do a search on YouTube, Dacor column installation, you will find a half-hour video there that goes through the whole process step by step by step from front to back. Covers everything. So that's a great thing if you need to see it in order to understand better. Besides that, inside every unit in the upper bin, whether it be a fridge or a freezer, or one of the 36-inch or 42-inch built-ins, you're going to find a bag with the install and user manual. So every job you go on, you're going to have a copy of the installation manual right there for you to review. And it covers the process from beginning to end. It also has the information for a trio column installation, as well as a paired column installation, as well as a single column install. So every step, every way you want to go about it, it's covered in the manual. So it's there for you to refer to. If for some reason it's not there, this is a demo unit from your dealer's showroom floor, there's a way to find it. So if you go to Dacor.com and you click on the products link at the top, and then go to column refrigeration, you'll see a page open up. Scroll to the model that you want, click on it, and then scroll downwards and you'll find this section of the page for that particular model called resources. And in there you'll find a link to the specifications, the installation manual, use and care manual, and anything else there that's pertinent to the model that you're doing the installation for. Now this is only applies to the product that's currently being sold. Now if you've got an older model that was maybe in your dealer's stock, or it's something off the showroom floor and you're not finding it listed here on the Dacor.com website, there's another way to find it through the website. Okay, so back on the home page, go to the top and click on the Owners tab and then select Product Support. It'll take you to a different website. Dacor knowledge base website. So click on the X to get that page to change and you'll come to this. So they'll have a section where you can type in the model number of the unit that you're looking for information on. Type that in, click OK, scroll down to the bottom of the page and you're going to find product info. There will be user manuals, instruction manuals, everything and anything that you would need for doing the installation. Okay, so this brings us to the end of the presentation. Hopefully this has covered everything in detail for you. Now we want to leave this open for a few minutes for Q&A. So if you've got any questions with regards to the install process, or you've got any questions with regards to Dacor, I'll do my best to answer it for you in the chat. And if I don't have an answer, I'll get your email address and then I'll get an answer to you. So thanks again for attending and I'll see you in the chat.